from the BC Wildfire Service and Forest Ministry, among others. We'll take you there live as soon as the press conference begins. I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. Welcome to you as we start early here on CBC Gem, on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page. Now, this update from the province comes as half of BC's water basins sit at level 4 drought. Level 5 is the worst. And this week, British Columbians were asked to conserve water as the province grapples with severe drought. And of course, BC is also facing a record-breaking wildfire season. We are watching to see when that press conference begins with Emergency Management Minister Bowen Ma. We'll take you there live as soon as it starts. And you can listen and watch as well and let us know your reaction. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And as we wait for that press conference to begin, joining me now is CBC's climate and science specialist, Darius Mahdavi. Hi there, Darius. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, perhaps you can get us up to speed on what the drought situation is in BC right now.
We're looking at levels of snowpack that are really unprecedented. As of a couple weeks ago, the levels were only about 4% of what they usually are this time of year.
4%?
Yeah, so incredibly low. We've never seen them like this. And we've had well below average precipitation over the last few months. We had the hottest May ever. A lot of regions through the interior saw one of their hottest Junes ever as well. So the situation is looking pretty bleak. I actually have the updated drought map here, and it looks like compared to what we were looking at yesterday, they've changed some of the regions. So you're right, the entire eastern part of the province is at level 4, but some regions, including the northeast parts of the Peace region, all of Vancouver Island, and parts of the central interior are now considered drought level 5, which means that adverse impacts are almost certain for those areas. So it is looking pretty dire. So we're really hoping for some precipitation in the weeks ahead.
Okay, and we are watching to see when that press conference begins. I see Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma just starting to speak now. Let's go live to the press conference.
Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Before we get into today's briefing on drought, I'd like to take a moment to provide a quick update on the wildfire situation in BC. As of today, there are 340
They look like they're having some technical difficulties. We'll continue to cover this press conference. Let's take you back live now.
109 fires have been caused by lightning and 5 fires have been caused by human activity. We are anticipating continued extreme fire behavior, and all of us need to do our part to prevent the situation from getting any worse, no matter where you are in the province. New and expanded evacuation orders and alerts came online in the Caribou, Kamloops, and Northwest fire centers. But the hard work of crews and support staff paid off in the Northwest, where the Powers Creek wildfire was reclassified as being held. As a result, the Regional District of Bulkley-Nechako, has rescinded their evacuation order, though the evacuation alert remains. Under the Wildfire Act, the province has access to all of the tools needed to coordinate provincial and international resources to work with the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre to bring in additional out-of-province resources, and have requested up to 1,000 additional international personnel. We will be bringing in an incident management team from Australia on August 15th. These additional resources will support approximately 160 international personnel from Mexico and the United States currently deployed in BC. And we are formally requesting today additional resources from the federal government. I've spoken with Minister Bill Blair, and we're optimistic our request will secure additional resources for our province. BC Wildfire Service has also contracted additional air support capacity in recent days. We are continuously assessing the situation across the province closely, and we will not hesitate to take action to keep people and communities safe. This includes assessing whether we have an operational need for a provincial state of emergency. So far, we have not used this power because it will not provide us with more resources to fight fires, as those powers already exist in the Wildfire Act. A provincial state of emergency is specific to tools under the Emergency Program Act to support people and communities, such as securing shelter for people and securing supply chains. As I mentioned, we have not yet needed these powers province-wide, but we will continue to ensure that we have all of the tools we need at our disposal to keep people and communities safe. I want to recognize the BC Wildfire Service and emergency management teams that are working around the clock to suppress fires, support communities, and share up-to-date information with the public. Now, I'd like to turn to the current drought situation in the province. As I indicated on Monday, we are monitoring the drought situation very closely. Drought and wildfires go hand in hand, and I'm joined virtually by Jonathan Boyd, hydrologist with the River Forecast Centre, who will present a technical briefing on the current situation. Today, we will share information including what our government is doing, as well as the steps that people and companies can take to respond to the current drought situation affecting many areas of the province. Droughts have impacted other regions in the world for years, including India, Australia, and California, and can impact people and communities in different ways, resulting in agricultural, health, economic, and environmental consequences. While it is not uncommon for British Columbians to face droughts, the level and extent of drought that we're witnessing this early on in the season is deeply concerning. We've been preparing for the drought conditions since last fall, and that's why we updated the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan in April. We have been working with communities over the past several months to prepare, including working with local government partners and First Nations to develop area-specific drought plans. Shortly, you will hear from experts about the severity of drought across the province and how our government is working to address it and what people can do to help. The province uses a 1 through 5 drought classification to explain the severity and appropriate level of response to drought conditions. Jonathan will provide more details for you on that classification. But for now, it is important to know that drought level 5 means almost certain that an area will see adverse impacts in both communities and ecosystems. As of today, 4 out of 34 water basins in British Columbia have been lifted to level 5. Those basins are Fort Nelson, Bulkley Lake, West Vancouver Island, and East Vancouver Island. 18 water basins are in level 4. That means over 2/3 of our water basins are in level 4 or 5. These conditions require action from everyone in BC. As our government works with local communities and First Nations, I'm calling on everyone, including businesses, to follow water restrictions set by First Nations or local authorities and take steps to conserve water even above and beyond those restrictions. Water is a precious resource, and we are fortunate to have some of the best water in the world. Every drop counts, and that's why everyone needs to do their part. That means thinking about small changes that you can make in your daily routine, such as watering lawns sparingly, if at all. Taking shorter showers, you can save 19 liters of water for every minute that you reduce a shower. Only doing full loads of dishes or laundry. Every load of laundry uses up to 190 liters of water. And turn off the tap when brushing your teeth or shaving. If each person and company makes a few small changes to how they use water, it can have a profound impact. If you are a water license holder, consider ways to reduce your withdrawal of water from the associated stream or aquifer. We are currently encouraging voluntary reductions at this time, but regulatory actions may be introduced if necessary. The BC Energy Regulator has already issued and expanded water suspensions for oil and gas operators. For the farming community, who I know is particularly impacted by drought. Right now, it's critically important to monitor and manage your water withdrawal from streams and wells. I know that many of you already do this, but now is the time for regular inspections. It may be helpful, It might be helpful to understand how the province monitors drought conditions in BC. Water basins differ from water reservoirs, but they are connected. To understand broader drought conditions, the province regularly monitors water basins across the province, which includes lakes, rivers, creeks, and groundwater wells. Some water reservoirs, on the other hand, are crucial storage facilities carefully managed by their respective license holders, such as First Nations and local authorities. These reservoirs ensure a steady supply of water to nearby communities. People can access information about water basins through the BC Drought Information Portal. They can access information about water reservoirs through their local First Nation or local authority. I urge everyone to connect with their First Nation or local authority through their website to receive information about the water restrictions in your area. I want to be clear, while the maps you'll see today and the maps that you'll see show very generalized information, the situation is very different in individual communities depending on their water sources. For example, one community who gets their water from one source might be in stage 3 right now, while a community 30 minutes away who draws their water from a different water source might be in stage 5. People are going to see very different situations in different communities, even in communities that are relatively close to one another. That makes responding challenging because supports have to be tailored and local and working with individual communities. Our government is working directly with communities to respond to these challenges. In the months leading up to this drought season, we have been helping communities get prepared and more resilient to drought. We're continuing to work directly with communities now as they put in place plans and water restrictions based on local situations. This month, EMCR will be releasing shortly a template. EMCR being Emergency Management and Climate Readiness will be releasing shortly a template to support emergency planning for water scarcity, which includes a water scarcity emergency exercise toolkit as well as other tools such as a water demand survey to assist First Nations and local authorities in gathering information regarding water demand. A reimbursement program is in place to reimburse First Nations and local governments for the transportation of alternate drinking water if required. We have also released a notice to
BC
vendors
Today
so
here
that they can
live streaming
self-identify
and
as
starting
being
early to bring you an update from the provincial government on the drought situation in BC. As you heard from Emergency Management Minister Bowen Ma, 4 out of 34 water basins in BC are now at level 5, which is the worst level. That would be Fort Nelson, Bulkley Lake, West Vancouver Island, and East Vancouver Island. 18 out of those 34 water basins are at level 4. And right now, no regulations are being put in place. These are voluntary actions being asked of British Columbians, but the minister warning that regulations may come. She is speaking right now, and as well, officials from the Ministry of Forests and Agriculture, as well as the BC Wildfire Service will be speaking as well. There have been some technical difficulties with the visuals, but we have corrected them now, and we'll bring you back live to the press conference. Here's Bowen Ma.
We're turning over every stone to try and find more feed for producers, despite the shortages across Western Canada. And we'll be presenting information to the federal government in the coming days to support the development of an agro-recovery package so that disaster-impacted farms can get back into production and to ensure that there are supports for producers who need it. That's what's already in place or in the works, and we're going to continue to take action with local communities to support them. If a community requires assistance, I encourage them to contact their local emergency management office. Just like with all of the other challenges that we have faced over the last few years, by working together, we will get through this. And I want to sincerely thank British Columbians that have already been following their local water restrictions and doing their part. I want you to know that you are making a difference. And right now, I'll turn it over to Jonathan Boyd with the River Forecast Center. John.
Hey, thank you, Minister Ma. Just sharing my presentation here. With the River Forecast Center, I'm calling in from Victoria, which is the traditional lands of the... Hi, my name is Jonathan Boyd. I'm a hydrologist with the River Forecast Center. I'm calling in from Victoria, which is the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I'm grateful to live and work on these lands. So the story of the current drought situation really begins exactly a year ago. Last spring was relatively cool and wet, and we had a delayed freshet period or high flow season. But that switched in the early stages of July. And looking back from the cumulative precipitation for the last 365 days, this map is available from Agriculture on Agri-Food Canada. We can see that the province measured pretty well 40 to 85% of average precipitation over the year. So this is a cumulative impact drought, and it really got kickstarted and pushed further when we hit hotter temperatures in May. And it really was record temperatures across BC. This plot here is for the historic record of the Agassiz area. And where it's unique with Agassiz is it goes back 130 years of records, and the rainbow colors just show the previous statistics of the 7-day mean temperature. Mean temperature is an average of the maximum and the minimum temperature, and just averaged over a 7-day period to smooth things out a little bit. But the anomaly that did happen in May, especially in mid-May, really was extraordinary. What didn't reach the actual temperatures that we got at the heat dome in late June of 2021, but we were getting 9-10 degrees above normal from an average of 7 days for quite a period of time. And what that led to was the earliest melt of the mountain snowpack that we've seen. So the province has a network of automated snow weather stations. An example there is on the right of Redfish Creek in the West Kootenay. Essentially, it's just a bladder that's filled with antifreeze that's covered with sheet metal, and it weighs the amount of snow that falls. And we get data on an hourly basis, but we can plot that data on a daily basis. And very similar to the Agassiz plot, just the rainbow colors show the historical trend and statistics. And this is a composite of long-term stations across BC. And what's interesting to note is that the current year, which is in black, ended up being the earliest snow-free year at those mountain snow stations. And it melted quicker than some of the previous years where it melted fast, which were also fairly low snowpack years across the province. And this year was a little different, where we did have essentially near average snowpack in late April. And it was that incredible heat of May that initiated and triggered that rapid melt of the snowpack. So with less precipitation and a fairly rapid melt and early melt, we're seeing the response in stream flows, and it's very low. So as of July 10th, 81 stations across the province were at their all-time record low for that date, and that's about a quarter of the stations. And another 187 stations were at the 5th percentile or lower, and that's more than 50%. And what the 5th percentile means would be it has a 5% chance of occurring on any given year, or a recurrence period of a 1 in 20 year type drought. So having over half of the sites already below a 1 in 20 year drought is pretty extraordinary. And we do have the capacity to look at how these changes happen on a daily basis. And again, going back to last year, it really started because of how dry it was in the summer and fall. And we did experience some of the lowest flows throughout the province in fall and winter that we've ever had. It's a little bit tricky to truly understand what that means. So it's easier to look at individual sites just to see what that means from a graphical representation. And this is a hydrograph. A hydrograph just means plotting flow data or water level data onto the year. And looking at the Fraser River at Hope, and again, the more rainbow colors are the historical statistics for the daily stream flow at the Fraser River at Hope. This station goes back 110 years, so there's a very long record. And as you can see from the July 11th, 2023 numbers of 2,641 cubic meters per second, we're well below anything that has ever occurred this early in the season. And compared to last year, where we were essentially near the peak of the flow last year, and then we still ended up in a pretty significant drought in the September and October period. So we're well below normal, and we didn't actually get to the levels we're at now until September 7th of last year for the Fraser River at Hope. And I'll roll through a few more sites throughout the province and show the current drought level status of those rivers, just to show the dramatics of each individual location. So the North Thompson River near McClure, this is just north of Kamloops, again, showing incredibly low compared to any historical previous flow at this time. It's at level 4 for the entire North Thompson region. For the Solom River near Courtenay, the hydrograph changes a little bit. The previous two examples showed peaks occurring in the spring and still staying high in the summer, just from the snowmelt process. On Vancouver Island, the highest flows occur in the fall and winter from rainstorms. So I'll just zoom in a little bit to see where we are this year for the Solom River near Courtenay. And it's essentially tracking at the lowest on record, and even quite a bit lower than what it ever got to around September of last year. And it's matching about where it was in 2015, when the snowpack was almost negligible on Vancouver Island. So it really shows how dramatic the snowmelt was this year. And then also the San Juan River near Port Renfrew, same as the Solom River, just doing a zoom in here. So Vancouver Island, as of today, both the east and west did move up to level 5 drought. And having a look where we were last year compared to this year, significantly lower for the San Juan River. It's a little bit different between the Solom River, which is near Courtenay, and there are water users. For the San Juan River, there aren't real water users there. So it does represent that natural state of the situation. But until we get into the period of time when we get precipitation events and atmospheric rivers, the San Juan River will stay quite low through the season. And moving a bit north to the Bulkley River near Houston, this would be in between the Burns Lake Vanderhoof area and then Smithers. The flows are extremely low, again, for this time of year, much lower than last year. And it shows the very fast peak from the warm, hot weather that we experienced. And it actually began in late April and really peaked in May. Over to the Pine River at East Pine, it's at level 4. Minister Ma mentioned that the BC energy regulator has suspended short-term water withdrawals from the oil and gas companies in this region, and it's pretty common throughout the piece in the Northeast to be well below normal for this time of year. And having a look at the Slocan River near Crescent Valley, this is in the West Kootenay, which is at level 4, another one showing maybe about a week ago, it actually was in the lowest on record. There was a little bit of a bump up from some recent rain in the West Kootenay, the Boundary region, parts of the Okanagan this week. So that was welcome, but it's not necessarily one rainfall that's going to get us out of a drought situation. It'll have to be ongoing precipitation events and essentially cold conditions through the summer and wet conditions to get us into a better place where we're not in these high level droughts. And just switching from flow and rivers to Shuswap Lake, a lot of the bigger lakes and important lakes in the province are actually managed. They may have a dam associated with them. So they're a little bit different than Shuswap Lake, which is showing the actual natural situation, and seeing here that based on the period of record at Shuswap Lake, that it is at its lowest level. Lakes do take a little bit more time to actually get to their lowest level for the season, which tends to happen actually in the fall and winter months. But it is a good representation of what the natural lakes in the province are looking like. And that, again, is compared to, or in contrast to the reservoirs that may be used for drinking water, like the Capital Regional District or Metro Vancouver, which can actually hold and store water. Flipping over to the groundwater situation, the province does have a network of groundwater observation wells, and these are showing a very similar trend as the flow stations and water level on lakes. So for the most part, about half of the groundwater sites are below the 10th percentile. So again, half the sites reaching a level that you might get once every 10 years. As a reminder, for more information on the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan that is available, Minister Ma did mention that it was updated in April 2023. It was really revamped in 2021, and we moved from a 4-level, 1 to 4 drought level situation to actually having 6 levels, level 0 being that there isn't a drought. And within that, there is information on what the core indicator thresholds are. In this case, I've shown them with the 30-day precipitation percentiles and the stream flow percentiles, but there's also additional indicators, which can be the temperature of a river, the groundwater situation, reservoir storage, and a multitude of others. It is a very comprehensive document. It does outline the province's work to respond to drought. Also, another useful tool to look at is the BC Drought Information Portal. This is where you will be able to see the update in the drought levels that typically happens on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. On this Drought Information Portal, there are also tabs specific to certain regions like the West Coast, the South Coast, Thompson, Okanagan, and Kootenay boundary. And those regions will actually manage subset smaller systems, so troublesome rivers or creeks that tend to get lower. And it is possible for those smaller creeks to be at a higher drought level than the overall basin. So having a look at the drought levels, which were just released as of this morning, we are at level 5 now for 4 of the regions. That's the Northeast, the Bulkley Lakes, and East and West Vancouver Island. There were some more increases to level 4, such as Haida Gwaii and areas in the East and West Kootenay and Lower Columbia. And it is very widespread. What's unusual this year is how early it is and how widespread it is. And plotted the maps from the last 2 years and kind of highlighting there with the historic drought levels arrow where we were at July 15th last year. So essentially the same time frame. And 2021 was quite a dramatic year for drought, really kick-started from the heat dome in late June. And we thought that was bad. The same for 2022. By the time we got to October, we thought, of course, that was a pretty extreme drought. So it's a lot more widespread and a lot earlier than normal this year. What's going to happen? That's always a question I get asked. And the real answer is we just don't know past about 7 to 10 days in terms of the weather forecast. So Environment and Climate Change Canada does provide seasonal forecasts for temperature and precipitation. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. For the most recent release, which was about 2 weeks ago, for July, August, and September, they were predicting a high likelihood of above normal temperatures for July, August, and September. And then on the right, the seasonal precipitation forecast, it shows potentially drier than normal conditions for Vancouver Island and the South Coast, and also around Prince George, the Almanica, and the Peace region. But really, there is no way to know for sure. And the biggest fear would be if we have dry conditions like we did last year moving into September and October. And only time will tell, but if that were to happen, we could end up in a pretty significant drought at the time when flows typically are at their lowest. And that's the end of the presentation for me, and I'll pass it back to Minister Ma.
Thank you, Jonathan. And before we move on to questions from the media, I have been informed that I've actually misspoke during my earlier remarks. The incident management team from Australia, the International Resources for Wildfire Fighting. So this is in reference to the International Resources for Wildfire Fighting, the incident management team from Australia. That crew is arriving July 15th, not August 15th. I previously said August 15th. They are arriving in a matter of days, not in a matter of weeks. I will now open it up to questions from the media. We have several technical staff available to answer questions from the River Forecast Center, the Ministry of Forests, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, as well as the BC Wildfire Service.
Thank you. As a reminder for reporters on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. That's *1 to ask a question.
You're watching a provincial update from BC's Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma. She's about to take some questions. We just heard from Jonathan Boyd, a hydrologist with the BC River Forecast Center, explaining the drought conditions in BC. And he said what's unusual this year is how early and how widespread the drought levels are. 2021 was considered quite dramatic, the year of the heat dome, as was last year, but this year is more widespread and earlier than normal. 4 out of 34 water basins in BC are at the worst level for drought, level 5. That would be Fort Nelson, Bulkley Lake, West Vancouver Island, and East Vancouver Island. 18 are at level 4. Some have also been stepped up from level 3. And in terms of the weather, he says we don't know yet past the next week to 10 days when it comes to what precipitation we're looking at. But Boyd said that it won't be one rainfall that will get us out of this. It has to be ongoing precipitation. But the expectation is dry weather ahead. We'll continue to cover this press conference for you. Let's go live now as they take questions from reporters.
The aquatic ecosystem and fisheries population. So we are anticipating that there may be recommendations going to the Minister for orders that would see limited water use by other licensees.
Sorry, what was the end of that? By when?
Limited water use from other licensees. So we may see other water license holders for a variety of different purposes, whether it be agricultural purposes, industrial purposes, having to reduce or cease use of water through a minister order.
And did you have a follow-up?
Always. Some experts in wildfire fighting are critical of your government for almost waiting for a forecast to come into effect. As in last week, we knew of the lightning that was coming. The extremely dry conditions, and yet the call for international assistance doesn't go out until the fires are ignited. Are you alive to that criticism, and are you thinking of changing the way that such requests are put out, to better get on the fires that do ignite? These firefighters, especially from the Southern Hemisphere, take upwards of a week or two to get here. So why not, when you see a forecast, seasonal, and then for the next 7 to 10 days, be so dire, why not put that out earlier?
It has been a very challenging wildfire season, not just here in BC, but right across Canada. We've been forecasting the need for additional resources for some time. I'll turn it over to Cliff Chapman, who can speak a bit more to how that forecasting happens, when resources are requested. But I will note that we do have international resources on the ground in British Columbia right now, and those were requested well ahead of time. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. I will just say we've had international support in BC for the better part of the last 4 or 5 weeks. Yes, we did anticipate this significant lightning event happening across BC, and as we see, it's continuing to happen yesterday, today. The challenge is not that we didn't request the resources, is that there is limited supply of firefighting resources to support the needs across Canada. Quebec is well over 3 million hectares of fire on the landscape. Alberta, we all know, had a significant wildfire season in the spring. And so it really is about trying to support all the agencies across Canada. So we have had requests in with the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. over the course of the last 5 weeks. 5 weeks.
Okay, for our next question, we're going to our next reporter in the room. Please go ahead.
Hi there, Michelle Bernoro, CTV. Just following up on the issue with respect to resources. I've been talking to, doing some of the stories on the forest fires, and we keep hearing from people who are like, oh, there's nobody here. We're calling the fire center, and they say they'll call back, but nobody ever calls back. We know this fire is getting closer. How short of resources are we right now to try and deal with the fires that we have burning?
I think we'll go back to Cliff, who can probably provide you a direct answer on that.
The question at our media availability we held a couple of days ago, we talked a little bit about resourcing and some of the challenges that we face in the province as well as nationally and frankly internationally. I couldn't put a number on that answer in terms of how short we are. We are surging our resources to our priority fires that are impacting communities, fires that have the potential to impact communities.
Good afternoon to our radio listeners on CBC Radio 1. You are joining BC Today in Progress. I'm Michelle Eliot. And on our live stream, we have been bringing you live the provincial government's update on the current drought and wildfire situation in BC. We've been watching Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma, who's been speaking along with officials from the River Forecast Centre and the BC Wildfire Service. You can let us know what you think of what you've seen and what you hear. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. Some of what we heard when it comes to wildfires is there are 345 fires in BC right now, half out of control. Minister Ma has requested federal resources, speaking with Public Safety Minister Bill Blair, and as well from Australia, an incident management team will be arriving July 15th. As for the drought, as you have been hearing and watching, the level of drought and extent of the drought, as described by Jonathan Boyd from the River Forecast Centre, is that it is much earlier and more widespread than normal, and that is concerning. We now have drought level 5 for 4 out of 34 water basins in BC. That's at Fort Nelson, Bulkley Lake, West Vancouver Island, and East Vancouver Island. 18 are at level 4, level 5 being the worst. Let's go back now live to the press conference with Cliff Chapman from the BC Wildfire Service.
And we're seeing that correlation on the ground right now. So we've been aware of what potentially could happen. It is happening, and we continue to request resources to support the province of BC.
Can I just get a point of clarification? And then a follow-up? So I know you said you don't have exact numbers, but you gave us a rough idea of what you've requested. So are we talking that we are short thousands of firefighters
No, I don't think that is fair. I would say we're putting in a request. I spoke on Monday as well about the fatigue that our staff are experiencing. They have been on really surging to fires in the Prince George Fire Center for over 2 months now, with some of the significant fires we have on the landscape up there. And we are a provincial agency, so it's all of our staff that go from any of our other fire centers to Prince George, and they work a 14-day cycle. And then they need rest days. And that goes for everyone who works for wildfire. So the request is to try to ensure we have enough resources for potential new starts, as well as the ability for us to rest our staff so that they can go back onto these fires after they're rested. So it's really trying to balance the rest and recovery and the emotional and mental and physical health of our own staff and our contractors, as well as being prepared for the lightning that continues to strike across this province and potential new starts. So I would not say we are short thousands of people. I would say we are trying to forecast into the next 7 to 10, even 14 days to try to have enough resources here that we can rest our own staff and surge to potentially new fires that could have a big impact in the province.
And my other question.
And
my other question is just, can you give us an idea of what drought conditions are like specifically in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley? And I'm sorry, it's probably somewhere in there, but what stage we're at here as well?
Sure. Over to the River Forecast Centre.
So for Metro Vancouver and the Sunshine Coast, it's currently at level 4 right now. And then for areas in the Fraser Valley, moving up into kind of Hope area, those watersheds are at level 3 from a provincial scale. When we get into the nitty-gritty, each individual river or creek system will be different. So the provincial scales are meant to be for curtailing water license use. However, for say Metro Vancouver, they may have their own different level of drought in terms of what type of water restrictions may come out for watering lawns. And that's the same for the Fraser Valley as well. So there's a difference between the broader provincial scale drought levels versus potential individual localized levels related to municipalities, local governments, and First Nations.
Our next question will be going to the phone. Our next question will be going to the phones to Mira Baines, CBC. Please go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. My first question is for my colleagues up north. There are low levels of water on the East Pine River in the Peace, but the energy regulator just stopped the water diversions to fracking companies yesterday on July 12th. Surely they knew that this was a problem for a while. Why did the energy regulator just stop the water diversions to fracking companies yesterday, knowing that this is a problem for a while?
I'm not sure that we'll be able to speak on behalf of the energy regulator, but we do have some staff from the Ministry of Forests here who may have some more information about licensee and regulations there.
Thanks, Minister Ma. It's Connie Chapman from the Ministry of Forests. We can follow up in regards to that question with the BC Energy Regulator, but we do know that staff in the Northeast have been watching the systems closely and looking at the usage within those systems, and also working closely with the BC Energy Regulator to ensure consistency in regards to the drought response.
Mira, did you have a follow-up?
Sure. This is just in terms of water restrictions. Where are we going to get direction from? Is it going to be a local government, or are we going to see provincial restrictions come in at some point? And what would be the tipping point for some of those water restrictions for individuals?
So through the Water Sustainability Act, the province is able to regulate water use by water licensees. Ms. Chapman had mentioned that earlier, and I'll pass it back to her to comment more on that. I will say that largely for residential use and within communities, those water restrictions would come from local governments and First Nations. And we'll be speaking with all the mayors and chiefs and chairs this afternoon about the drought conditions that we're seeing and encouraging communities to escalate their water restrictions. Over to you, Connie.
So as Minister Ma said, under the Water Sustainability Act, there are tools with the ability to regulate water license holders. One of the tools that is being considered is known as a temporary protection order, and those are minister orders in which water license holders would have to cease use of water within areas that are defined as being water scarce and meet the specific criteria as per the legislation. And currently, those tools are being explored for some of the streams that are showing sensitivity in response to this current drought situation. So we may see those orders be recommended to the Minister for decision.
Our next question is for Richard Zussman, Global
You are
News.
listening
Please go
to
ahead.
and watching a live press conference, an update on the drought and wildfire situation in BC. Let's continue to listen in now to Minister Bowen Ma and officials as they take questions from reporters.
Now, why not put in restrictions today?
So many communities already have water restrictions in place, and we'll be working with communities to escalate those water restrictions as quickly as possible. As you heard from the Ministry of Forests, we are actively reviewing and considering orders on water licensees, and there have already been some restrictions that have been brought in place by the BC Energy Regulator as well.
Richard, did you have a follow-up? Or did you?
What does it tangibly mean for people to be at level 4 or 5 drought? And if we continue to see these trends continue, other than the explanation I heard from Cliff around fire, like what does it just mean for people living in this province to be at this bad of a place in terms of water levels?
It would depend a lot on where you live. So depending on where you live, the consequences of extreme drought could be very different. People and ecosystems are going to see very different situations in different communities, even in communities that are relatively close. We do have the provincial drought scale that I'll turn over to the Ministry of Forests to speak to more clearly. But I will also say that when it comes to water restrictions, which can be very stressful and very difficult for people in communities, especially if we're asking them to abandon their lawns or reduce water usage in businesses that can potentially cause economic challenges for those businesses. While those are difficult, the need to take action now and sooner, it is more than about today or the next week or the next few months. Extreme drought conditions can result in long-term economic impacts as well, which we are assessing actively. So I'll turn it over to the Ministry of Forests to speak more to the kind of the different drought levels and what people can expect that they mean.
Thanks, Minister Ma. It's Connie Chapman with the Ministry of Forests. So as Jonathan Boyd from the River Forecast Center identified, we do have a 6-scale drought level from 0 to 5. Depending on where we are at, from levels 3, 4, and 5, this is where we start to see those adverse impacts. One of the impacts that is visible to all is just the low flows within the streams, and these definitely have it results within concern for the aquatic ecosystem and other aspects within the environment. As Minister Ma has identified, yes, we are short term, but it's also that long term. We want to ensure the health of the aquatic ecosystems and the sustainability of the aquatic ecosystems. As these drought levels continue and stream flows do decrease, this is where concerns in regards to fisheries populations do become a consideration that we are looking at very closely and monitoring.
Our next question is from Rob Shaw, Check News. Please go ahead.
Hi, Minister. You rattled off earlier some things people could be doing to preserve water. I wonder if you could go through that again, add in some more and speak about the kind of change in mindset people are going to have to get their heads around when it comes to their daily habits and their daily usage of water and the benefits of them doing some of the things you're suggesting there.
You know, here in British Columbia, we are blessed with bountiful water sources normally. We have some of the best water in the world, and I think a lot of British Columbians are used to being able to access as much water as they want in their day-to-day lives. Unfortunately, what we're seeing with the climate crisis is that the changing climate is creating changing conditions here in British Columbia. And one of those changing conditions is that our access to clean water is very, very challenged. The situation is severe. We need people to turn their minds to a conservation mindset now. We need people to consider whether or not they really do need to water those lawns. And to be clear, many communities will likely go to restrictions on there anyway. We need people to take shorter showers. Even a minute shorter shower saves water. If everyone does it, if millions of people are doing these small steps, like shortening showers or watering their lawns sparingly, or making sure that they're only using their dishwasher or their laundry machines when they are full loads, that does absolutely make a difference. We need people to be calm, we need people to care about this, and we need people to conserve.
Rob, did you have a follow-up?
Sure. Just for some of the other agriculture folks on the line, where does the agriculture sector and the farming and food security sectors fit into our kind of drought planning when it comes to water scarcity, irrigation for crops, feed, that type of thing? Like when it comes down to making a priority choice on water, where do the farms and that are growing our food and running our cattle fit into the usage of water?
Thank you so much for that question. And I do want to acknowledge that we are already hearing from ranchers and farmers, particularly in the north, that are facing challenges. And it is something that is very much top of mind for us, not only for the well-being of those farmers and their farms, but also from a food security perspective as well. I'll turn it over to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food.
Question. Thank you. My name is Michelle Eliot. I'm with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. We work very closely with the Ministry of Forests on the water tables, and we are very active in helping make those difficult decisions when they need to be. We totally understand right now that there is going to be some pretty serious impacts for our producers, particularly in these areas that are drought affected. Most kind of critically right now would be those sectors that rely on unirrigated forage. So we're looking at a pretty serious feed situation for our cattle producers and dairy producers. So we're working with our federal counterparts to try to actively assess what the situation is, get a handle on what those needs are, and then put in what's called an agri-recovery request to help producers get back on their feet and maintain their herds. I might ask my colleague Mark Raymond to step in and just do a little bit more details on how we actually work with the water tables in the Ministry of Forests to set priorities about water use, because it is complicated.
Thanks, Michelle. We've got staff throughout the province that are linked in with regional drought tables that feed up into our provincial discussions and working with the Ministry of Forests to ascertain and assess the impacts to the agricultural community. And when there are decisions being made regarding temporary protection orders or any regulatory tools, agriculture is part of those discussions, and the impact to agriculture is taken into consideration as part of those overarching decisions.
Our next question is for Lisa Yusta, City News 1130. Please go ahead.
Hi there. I heard the answer to the earlier question about why not doing restrictions now, but I guess I'm just not hearing it, and I'm wondering if people who hear this, and the public are going to hear this as well. Like, if this situation is severe, if as like that, there's is getting critical with the access to clean drinking water, why not just impose restrictions now so people get how imperative it is?
So part of the work of the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, part of our efforts since we were created in December, was to be able to provide more proactive information to communities and to the public. So when we are forecasting situations, we want to get out ahead of it and start talking about it publicly. Some of the situational updates that we've been providing since April are meant to do that. They're meant to signal to the public what is coming. One of the challenges when it comes to drought is that we will be able to forecast a drought situation long before people will feel it on the ground. So for a lot of community members, I recognize that it might not feel real right now. We are here saying that absolutely it is real. Communities are putting in water restrictions. We need people to follow them. We are asking communities to escalate water restrictions, and that's going to be happening as soon as this afternoon. Well, pardon me, let me be clear. As soon as this afternoon, we are actually meeting with community leaders to discuss this and work with them to escalate those water restrictions.
Lisa, did you have a follow-up?
It is very clear, because that's one of the other things that you've also spoken about, but perhaps you can put a finer point on it like you did with that answer just there about how people are going to feel this. Are you going to see that you're not going to be able to get meat products? You're not going to be able to get vegetables? Like, how is this going to impact people's daily lives other than just watering their lawn?
We are actively working to assess the situation and understand the longer-term impacts of an extreme drought situation. Right now, what we're asking people is to start conserving water now. We will continue to provide these updates in the future, and as more information comes forward, we'll be sharing that publicly as well.
Our next question is for Wolf Debner, Black Press. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I'm just looking at slide 17 here. And if I read that slide correctly, BC has never been drier on this day than it has been today, based on the available data. How long do you expect this trend to continue?
Jonathan, is he still on the line?
River Forecast Center. It's never been like this early. Really, the drought program kicked into gear about maybe 12 years ago or so. So we don't necessarily have the records of drought levels. Looking back on some of the historic statistics on those hydrographs, there were some years that did stand out that you can spot in long-term records. One of them being 1926, which I don't think any of us have experience direct and firsthand, but looking back at the climate record from 1926, it was a very hot and warm April, and may have been the warmest April on record. And it was also warm in March as well. So that might have been a year where the snowpack melted even earlier. Where it didn't show up as much was in the higher elevations, the upper Fraser, the typical areas that melt a little bit later on in the season. So we have had years where it may have actually been a little bit worse at this time for, say, Vancouver Island and the South Coast. An example of that was in 2015, when the snowpack there around April 1st was around maybe 14 to 25% of normal for those regions. Whereas this year it was maybe just a little bit below normal. So we did have pretty good snowpack. And every year, of course, is a little bit different. 2019, we had a very hot May, and it looked like we were trending into a potential province-wide drought situation. But then rains came in July and August. And in recent memory, it was the worst kind of weather conditions, but it was fantastic from a wildfire situation. It wasn't very busy in 2019. So much just depends. If it is already at this level right now, typically we are moving into the driest months of the year, especially for the South Coast and Vancouver Island, which is July through August. And it really is going to revolve around what will happen come September and October, and whether we get the province-wide precipitation events, such as things like atmospheric rivers. We do need big rainfall events and multiple rainfall events to actually get us out of this drought situation. For the interior, that can still happen in July and August, just based on the weather patterns, that there are weather systems that can be widespread and rainy. But really only time will tell. It looks like for the moment, at least the next 5 to 6 days, still just kind of showery thunderstorm activity. There always is kind of a possibility of wetter conditions, spotting that maybe early next week, but some weather models show it, some don't. And really it just depends on time and what we actually do experience through the summer here.
Wolf, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, this might be a long shot question, but has the ministry or has government generally looked to other jurisdictions to see if there are any points of comparisons, say in Australia or in other parts of the Southern Hemisphere, where you can sort of draw any sort of policy recommendations, any sort of ideas onto how to deal with an event of this magnitude, of this type? Is there a role, a case that you can study and say, okay, this is how things are going to unfold. These are the measures that we need to take.
I think it's fair to say that we are always trying to learn more about what other jurisdictions do during situations like this, and on every topic. We're constantly doing jurisdictional scans to understand what has and hasn't worked in other areas. However, it is also extremely important to note that British Columbia will face a different situation from different provinces, from different states. Our water basins are different, our culture is different, our landscape is different. So we really do need to approach the situation from a localized level as well. We really have to make sure that what we're doing works for British Columbia and British Columbians, given our unique ecosystem, our economy, and our people. But I'll also open it up to Peter Brock to see if he has any other comments that he wanted to offer.
Peter Brock, Executive Director for Provincial and Regional Operations. So as the Minister mentioned, we're always looking elsewhere. It's worth mentioning the Watershed Security Strategy and Fund Survey that went out for intentions paper on behalf of the province. That certainly is based on best practices. So we always are looking at that. When we look at some of the proactive measures that the province took early on in the season, meeting with communities very early, hosting seasonal readiness meetings in the early spring to really work with communities, convey the concern for drought, really encourage proactive approach to managing it locally, and also providing a suite. The province has provided a number of suites of tools to support. All of those efforts are based on best practices, and when we bring in experts and consultants to help us work through these policy challenges, it's always based on what other jurisdictions are doing. So generally, when you bring experts to the table, they draw on expertise around the world, and the benefit of that is that British Columbia is well positioned to continually evolve and progress in the hazard of drought. So I'll maybe leave it there. Thank you.
That was Peter Brock with the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness you were just listening to there. This has been a provincial update on the drought situation in BC, led by Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Bowen Ma. And the headlines out of that are that 4 out of the 34 water basins in BC are at level 5 drought, which is the worst level. That would be Fort Nelson, Bulkley Lakes, West Vancouver Island, and East Vancouver Island. 18 are at level 4. And as we heard, no individual or residential restrictions are being brought in by the provincial government, but Minister Ma said that communities are putting in their own water restrictions, and she is going to meet with community leaders to discuss whether to escalate those water restrictions, as she said, this afternoon. But they are asking individuals to start conserving water voluntarily right now. We'll go to our news update in a moment. And coming up in our next half hour here on BC Today, you're listening to us on CBC Radio and watching our live stream on our website and on CBC Gem on YouTube as well. We will get reaction to a deal, a tentative agreement. The terms that were put forward by the federal mediator have been accepted by both sides in the ongoing port strike. We'll get reaction from the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Plus, if you're concerned about climate change, you may be thinking about putting in a heat pump to conserve energy as well and reduce your carbon footprint. We'll take your questions to someone who works and installs heat pumps on Vancouver Island. That's all coming up after this CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. As Michelle mentioned, a tentative deal has been reached and the BC port strike. Cargo could be moving again within hours. Details of the 4-year contract won't be released until it's ratified. And as we've been hearing on the show, the provincial government is once again calling on British Columbians to follow water restrictions as much of the province deals with dry drought conditions. 4 out of 34 water basins have been lifted to drought level 5. Meanwhile, the province expects the extreme fire conditions to continue for the next several weeks. There are now more than 340 wildfires burning. Minister Bowen Ma says she is officially requesting additional resources from the federal government. Federal Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair says the Canadian Armed Forces, Parks Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and the Canadian Coast Guard are all ready to assist. persist. And now taking a look at the forecast, the heat warning continues for the North Thompson. Severe thunderstorms are also in the forecast for several sections of the province. Elsewhere on the north coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 18. Highs reaching 25 with some smoke, sunshine, and a chance of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, widespread smoke with a high of 23 degrees. Highs up to 28 with some sun and cloud and a risk of thunderstorms in the Kootenays and Okanagan. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs in the mid-20s. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. And of course, much more on the drought and wildfire update throughout the day from you on CBC Radio and on our afternoon shows, of course, and on CBC News at 6 and 11 on our website anytime, cbc.ca/BC. Well, to other BC news now. Federal Minister of Labour Seamus O'Regan has announced that the 13-day BC port strike is over. He said the International Longshore and Warehouse Workers and the BC Maritime Employers Association, the two sides in the dispute, have accepted the federal mediator's terms of settlement and have reached a tentative agreement on a new 4-year deal. For more on this and her reaction, we've reached the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Bridget Anderson. Good afternoon.
Nice to be here.
Good to have you. What's your reaction?
Well, we are very pleased to see that a tentative deal has been reached. You know, this port strike now, 13 days, has had a significant impact on our economy, disrupting about $9.7 billion in trade, estimated by our port shutdown calculator that we launched this week. And so while we are very happy to see that there is a tentative deal, we are now saying the focus must be on ensuring that our supply chains are resilient and we don't get back to this place again.
What does that mean for future then?
Well, you know, the federal government has an opportunity to take a look at the tools that they have in their toolkit to address any kind of disputes and to resolve them when they happen on the waterfront. We had been urging the federal government to take action since prior to the dispute starting, and this is a time for the federal government to ensure that at a time where we are so reliant upon our supply chains that nothing happens to disrupt them again. And I should also mention that, you know, while we are pleased to see that operations are going to resume and very quickly, we understand that workers will be back on the job later this afternoon. It is going to take time for normal operations to resume. And it could, in fact, take even weeks for things to get back to normal.
So what impact will that have then? I heard yesterday from our reporter Mira Baines, who was at your event, saying that businesses are waiting for fall shipments, Christmas shipments. I mean, what will that mean for the months to come?
Well, you have to understand that nearly everything that we use on a daily basis, from medications, automobiles, household appliances, food, so many things come through the ports on the west coast of Canada. I have been told that about 28 cargo ships are in the queue to be unloaded in Vancouver and Prince Rupert, and that's going to take time for that to happen. And the delays could be even longer for the railways. So for those businesses that are awaiting goods that they want to sell now or in the fall, you know, those are going to be delays. And the concern is for the consumers as well, who could be facing increased costs because of the disruption that has happened over the past few weeks.
Now, this agreement still has to be ratified by both sides. It would cover 4 years. How much assurance does that give you for the long term?
Well, that is a good chunk of stability. You know, 4 years is a long-term deal, especially when you look at a prior deal. I think if you looked at negotiations, it actually was a shorter period of time. So the time is of the essence now for the federal government to really look hard at how they can make our supply chains more resilient. And there is work to do as well as in making sure that our international reputation is rebuilt and that we're seen as a stable and secure trading partner. So really, you know, from the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade's opinion, we need to see the federal government take action to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
What do you mean by that? You have businesses have been calling for ports to be considered an essential service. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there are many different kinds of tools available in the toolkit for the federal government. Really, the action they took yesterday was very encouraging, and it was great to see and has landed in a tentative agreement. The only other option available to them was to recall Parliament and to pass back to work legislation. So we're asking the federal government, is there other action that they can take to address a dispute when it happens on their waterfront? And are there other actions that can be taken to ensure that supply chains remain resilient, particularly at a time where it has been a pretty fragile recovery due to COVID and due to the floods that we had back in 2021. And so we need to ensure that that resiliency remains, that businesses and consumers can get the goods that they need, and that we as Canada are continued to look at as a stable and reliant trading partner.
Very good to have you on the program for your immediate reaction to this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
That's Bridget Anderson, President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. We'll, of course, be continuing to watch this story as it develops here on CBC. Right now it is 12:39, 1:49 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1 and watching us live streaming as well. Welcome to you watching us on YouTube, on the CBC Vancouver page, on the CBC Gem app, or on our website, cbc.ca/BC. Well, a wildfire in North Vancouver is responding to suppression efforts, according to officials. It's burning in the Lower Seymour Conservation Reserve, and it was first spotted shortly after 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Now, it covers about 0.3 hectares, and the smoke can be visible from downtown Vancouver. Brant Arnold-Smith is director of the Metro Vancouver Emergency Operations Centre, and he told the Early Edition on CBC Radio 1 this morning that diligence from the public was a huge help.
Yesterday, when this fire sparked up, we were really glad to see the public exercising their due diligence and calling and reporting this in a timely manner. BC Wildfire Service received over 700 calls in the initial stages of the incident. So that was very helpful and allowed our responders to get on scene quickly and throw all the resources at it that we had.
Officials say the fire is in a secluded gully and no structures are at risk. They will provide more details at a press conference this afternoon, and that is scheduled in just about an hour and a half from now at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Right now it's 12:41, 1:41 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, with ongoing concerns about the effects of climate change, there has been booming interest in what we can do as citizens. And in BC, demand for heat pumps as a way to both cool and heat our homes has risen. Now, the BC government has strongly promoted heat pumps to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. BC Hydro offers rebates of up to $11,000 to make the switch. And so far this year, more than 10,000 people have applied for the rebates. That's over 40% more than applied all of last year, over triple in 2021. We're taking your calls. What's your experience with heat pumps, and what are your questions about installing or maintaining them? We'll have someone on standing by to take your questions. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca is our address. And I see some questions coming in already for our guests. And Joe Sherry is owner of Controlled Air Heating and Cooling, and he joins me now from Courtney. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First, what kind of demand are you seeing when it comes to heat pumps?
It's definitely picked up, especially right now with the heat. Everybody's looking to make their house a little cooler. So it's picked up in the last couple months for sure.
Well, let's start with the basic first of all. You know, for people who don't know, what is a heat pump exactly? How does it work?
So basically, a heat pump transfers heat from outside and brings that heat to the inside, or transfers heat from inside the house and gets rid of it outside the house.
Okay, how does that? Can you elaborate on how that works?
Basically, there's a couple components of the heat pump system. There's a compressor. It's pumping refrigerant through some lines. It pumps it inside the house, removing the heat with the refrigerant and pumping it back through to the outside. And with the use of fan motors, gets rid of the heat outside for air conditioning.
Okay, and why is it considered more energy efficient?
Efficient than, say, like baseboard?
Yes, that's right, and using gas.
It just uses less power than electric heater, resistance heaters. Gas, it's a cleaner way of heating your house compared to gas.
Okay. And how would it compare to an air conditioner, for example?
I mean, it depends. I mean, it's basically the same process with the heat pump. It's the same as like air conditioner, but it's that you're just getting the heating benefit out of it when you have the heat pump as well.
And what would be your recommendation? You know, what are people preferring right now then?
Well, I mean, everybody with these rebates that are available for everybody, everyone's kind of hopping over to the heat pump, the high efficiency heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps, just because you're a lot of times getting, the majority of your system install for free.
Right. And what are the costs? Before I go to our question here, what are the costs that people can be looking at?
Like costs for a new system or
yeah, I mean, okay, so how much could a heat pump cost before the rebates?
I mean, it's dependent on what you want to do and the size of the house and the size of the system. But I mean, you're looking, between $10,000 and $20,000 for a new system install. But again, it just depends on the size of the house.
Okay, and what's included in those costs? Because I imagine there's the heat pump and then there's also the installation costs. How does that all break down?
Yeah, there's, sometimes, a lot of times with oil and gas, there's the electrical power for the house isn't as large. So sometimes you have to do a service upgrade. In terms of that, there's alterations on the ductwork to make these units fit in there, because like an oil furnace, they're generally pretty grand in size. So, have to change things up a little bit. Stuff like that, the cost for the labor and whatever other materials that we need to install the system.
Okay, Joe Sherry is with me, and we are taking your calls, your questions, and tell us your experience with heat pumps. What's it been like for you? What are your questions about installing or maintaining a heat pump? Interest has grown over the last year, including because of the rebates being offered up to $11,000 by BC Hydro. Our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. Shayna is on the line in Victoria. Hi there, Shayna.
Hi, Michelle, and hi. Is it Joe?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Joe Sherry.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Right. Do you use a heat pump now, or you have a question?
Well, I live in an apartment building, but I've been watching this issue for years with a lot of interest. And what I want to know is, Joe, how easy would it be to ramp up production so that all new construction heat pumps, and are they the geothermal option? Could be mandatory. I mean, houses last for 80 years. So to not jump on this right away, to allow new construction that's going to pollute and cause more forest fires is not smart. And also, can they handle bigger buildings like multi-unit apartment buildings, hospitals, office towers? But most importantly, is this the geothermal one, which is the best one where you sink a pipe into the ground and use the natural heat under the
right
So
really good questions, Shayna. Thank you very much. Perhaps let's talk about the different kinds of heat pumps then, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, well, just one thing is she's talking about for multi-use, family use apartments and stuff. You're starting to see it more and more in new construction. They're adding these to this. I believe I've heard rumors of the BC building code changing to making it mandatory that a house has to maintain a certain temperature. So I don't know how soon or when that potential is going to happen.
What are the challenges right now when it comes to multi-units? Because the rebates don't apply, right, to condos and stratas. Yeah. So what would be the challenge to someone wanting to put one in if they live in an apartment? I mean,
the challenges is one, noise. Like every strata is different. So different stratas have different rules for noise, looks. We've been a part of a couple of strata projects already, because it's getting hotter and hotter. So these people, they need some comfort cooling. So it's just, and another big thing is getting power to the outdoor units, because we're trying. It's a finished building, but generally the panels on one side, and then where you want to put the outdoor units, there, it's all finished ceiling. So we're trying to see if we can remove the baseboard heating and try to steal power from that. There's just,
It's
that's
complicated.
Kind of yeah, so it's never really easy, but it is obtainable. But sometimes it just takes a little thinking to get there.
Okay, and you said you've been involved in a couple of projects. Do you see more interest then when it comes to stratas, for example?
Definitely. It's a good. Well, I'm going to say it's a large part of our work right now is dealing with different stratas and just trying to navigate the different rules that all these stratas have to accommodate these people.
Oh, is that right? Okay. And what about her questions about the kinds of heat pumps and where it gets heat from?
I mean, geothermal is great. It is pretty expensive to set up a good ground loop. You're there in West Hills in Victoria is a good example. It's a very big geo farm. I think the majority of the houses and some of the businesses are all on that loop. So I mean, it's definitely good. It costs a lot of money to get it to install it. So
okay,
but it is a great way of collecting heat and dispersing it.
Okay. Saina, thank you so much for the great questions from Vancouver Island. And from Vancouver Island, we are joined by Joe Sherry, owner of Controlled Air Heating and Cooling, as we take your questions and comments on heat pumps and what has been your experience. What are your questions about installing and maintaining them? Really good question about stratas and how you would do it for multi-unit apartments. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. And Samuel is up next now in Vancouver. Hi, Samuel.
Hi.
Hi. And so what's it like for you?
So I'm a renter in Vancouver, and I live in a laneway house.
Okay.
My landlord's admitted to me that he built the laneway house as cheaply as possible.
Okay.
So it definitely isn't energy efficient to the point where the door seals aren't even very effective. We can see light through the door frames of our entrance doors. There was no cooling system in the house when we moved in, and our heating is cheap baseboard heating. So my question is the government looking to implement any energy-saving requirements for new builds, especially rental new builds? Because, people who are building for rentals will likely try to go for the cheapest up front because they might not be interested in how much it costs on a monthly basis for heating. So is the government looking to implement anything like that? If so, why not? And what are the options for renters like me for maybe portable systems?
Okay, really good question. Let's go to Joe. I don't know if you can answer the question about energy-saving requirements, but you talked a little bit earlier about sort of rumblings that you're hearing about the building code for new builds.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it. It's up to when people build something, they just have to build it to the set building code. So if that changes to where these buildings have to maintain a certain temperature, then that's where you're going to start to see it more and more. It'll be mandatory, so people will just have to put some sort of form of cooling into these homes.
Yeah.
Portable ACs are great. They're loud, they're noisy, they're not super efficient, but you can still pick those up generally anywhere. Canadian Tire,
if you can,
places like that.
Sometimes the demand is great.
Sometimes, yeah, exactly.
And so portable. Is there such a thing as a portable heat pump or no?
I've seen at different times little things pop up. They're not very common. They're not very commonly found out there.
Okay.
I've seen some products.
Is that right? Okay. It sounds like, is that something that perhaps is being looked at for the future, or?
I mean, I would, that's pretty much like a mini split heat pump. That's probably the best bet if you're going to do something like that,
right,
in terms of cost and just functionality would be. Yeah.
It sounds like it's not feasible right now.
It probably could be, but I just don't know how well they'd all work. And the problem is then you're getting the wrong people installing these things, and then they sometimes don't work. And yeah.
Okay. What would you recommend then as a portable option? Would it be a portable AC?
Yeah, just a portable AC. If you're worried about the the heat in the summer, but they're generally not going to break the bank in terms of use. And
okay,
yeah, that's.
Let's take, here's an email from Karen who writes, I live in a high rise in downtown Vancouver. It is a beautiful space, but it's like a greenhouse in the summer, with those floor to ceiling windows that are exposed to the sun from sunrise to sunset. We couldn't install an air conditioner because none of our walls have exterior access and we have no balcony. Our solution was to get our windows tinted. I can say it's amazing. Massive reduction and good for the environment and far less expensive than the alternatives. Maybe this option can be included in the conversation and in those rebates as well. What do you make of that? It sounds pretty simple, getting those windows tinted.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even just putting up good blackout blinds, it's going to make a big difference. You're getting so much solar gain from having large windows, and everything helps. So,
Marilyn is our next caller now in Nanaimo. What are your thoughts on heat pumps, Marilyn?
I have one and I like it, but I feel that they're far too costly and too unaffordable for too many people. I think one of the reasons that has come to be, they've increased in price astronomically over the past 2 or 3 or 4 years, is that all of the encouragement and advertising that BC Hydro and media does to get a heat pump, I think, has just created the prices to go through the roof.
As demand has increased. May I ask what the costs were like for you?
Well, I've had mine a few years, but I know that it is more than doubled and maybe tripled since I put mine in. That would be less than 10 years ago.
Wow. Although that's quite a while now, when it comes to the demand that we're seeing.
Well, maybe, but if you go from about 8,000 to 28 or 30, that's what they're now costing to put a heat pump in a house.
Wow. Well, Marilyn, it's a good point that you make, right? That demand gets, there's obviously the promotion from the BC government through the
I
rebates.
think it's just helped to create the increased cost, too.
Okay. Marilyn, thank you so much for the point. It's a good one. Chris is up next, our last caller here from Salt Spring Island. Hi, Chris.
Hi there.
What's your experience with heat pumps?
Just now, this isn't my personal experience, but just along the lines of the budget for a heat pump. A friend of mine recently installed a heat pump himself in a smaller, like a single, one-level bungalow, so smaller place, probably 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. And so he said that it was remarkably, I mean, he's a bit mechanically inclined, but, he's not a tradesman or anything. And and he found it fairly straightforward to install on his own. And he came in with around $6,000 all in, including the purchase of the heat pump himself and the installation and any additional materials. He really said it was quite straightforward, and I was surprised to hear that. So that does give a homeowner on a budget options, especially if it's a smaller, smaller building.
Chris, thank you very much. And Joe, you were saying that it really does depend on the size of your home, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and there is affordable options out there. I mean, especially with these rebates, if you just want a single zone in one room to kind of keep one section of your house.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like I'm doing stuff for under $6,000 for like a single zone heat pump, just to
to have one place of escape.
Exactly.
Joe, thank you so much. Obviously, a lot of interest in heat pumps. Thanks so much for taking these questions.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me.
Joe Sherry, owner of Controlled Air Heating and Cooling. That is it for our show today. Thanks so much to all of you for calling in. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon.